Welcome back to another FPL video. Today I'm talking about my updated draft, and there have been several changes from my first draft video. I'll be talking about my thought process when building my 50-man squad, and I'll surely make some further changes over the next few weeks until we reach the Game Week 1 deadline. And on that Friday, the 11th of August, I will be doing the deadline stream, so be sure to tune in for that and check out all my other videos for the best budget players and the best players in each position, as well as much more headed your way. So be sure to share this video around with those that love FPL, like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel as we're looking to get to 19,000 subscribers. We're very close to that goal, and I think we can get to that very, very soon. But without further ado, let's jump straight into this video. I have stayed with the same team for the goalkeeper, but I have gone for a different choice here in Flecken. I believe he will become the #1 choice and David Raya will leave the club, but I'm still waiting on official confirmation, because if David Raya stays, then I'd be a bit less confident, of course, and naturally I'd probably go for another goalkeeper, most likely a 5 million choice like Ramsdale, but I would rather go for Flecken, coming in at 4.5 million with a lot of bonus points and saves potential. He was fantastic for Freiburg last season, and Brentford has some good long-term fixtures, and I'm expecting them to once again finish in a similar position this time round and have another decent season as they establish themselves as a long-term Premier League club. So Flecken is my preferred choice as the goalkeeper, but it all depends on David Raya. I believe he's the best defender in the game, and of course I'm referring to Trent Alexander-Arnold, but that doesn't mean he's an absolute must-have from Game Week 1, and I'm still debating going without him to start the season, because even in games such as Game Week 1 against Chelsea away, he is benchable, and if you've got a bit of squad depth, then you could make a case for dropping him down to the bench, and then you start to consider, is he really worth that 8 million price tag to start the season? And perhaps not. In the medium to long term, especially when Liverpool's fixtures get better, then Trent Alexander-Arnold is a fantastic option, and even in Game Week 2 against Bournemouth at home, I think Trent Alexander-Arnold could easily get a 9 to 12 pointer with a clean sheet, maybe an attack and return, and some bonus points as well. So I still highly recommend Trent in the long run, but I don't think he is the greatest short-term asset from the very beginning of the Premier League season. Then we go to the other defenders. Nathan Ake didn't even score 100 FPL points last season. The same goes for any other Man City defender, but I do expect an improvement in this regard. However, with Man City signing Gvardiol, a left-footed centre-back who could also play as a left-back, Nathan Ake could face some very stiff competition, and he could drop down to the bench, and that would make him just not appealing at all as an asset, because when you look at bonus points, John Stones is the best in that regard. Nathan Ake might be the best pound for pound alongside Akanji, but with yet another top-quality defender coming into Manchester City, then you just don't really have confidence in any single one of those defenders as genuine FPL options. But the main reason why I've got Nathan Ake in at the moment is because he's 5 million, he's got great long-term fixtures, and I would argue he was one of Man City's best players last season, and arguably the very best up until he got injured towards the very end of the campaign. But he slotted back in for the Champions League final, looked at home, and he is a quality player. I'd say he's also quite underrated as well, but as an FPL option, you certainly can debate his qualities there, because he doesn't really get that many FPL points overall. So he's definitely another one I'm looking to consider offloading. I'm not going to say the same thing about Luke Shaw though. I think he's a very solid option. Whilst he doesn't have a great FPL history in terms of points, I think the ceiling is definitely there with the bonus points and the clean sheets, and he can get the occasional attack and return. 1 goal and 4 assists last season, but the bonus points is where the big hauls are out there for Luke Shaw. And when you look at game weeks such as Wolves at home to start the season, that's where you're expecting clean sheets, and also against Nottingham Forest at home coming up very soon in Game Week 3. And I think a double or triple up in Man United is viable. I think 2 is the sweet spot at the moment, because the fixtures are quite mixed bag, and I think going for one defender like Luke Shaw and then one midfielder, either Rashford or Bruno Fernandes, is probably the best way to cover the Red Devils. And the final defender is Pervis Stupinian in my starting 11. He's got fantastic fixtures, at least for the first 3. Then it gets a bit rough, and that's where he's easily benchable. But I think for the first 3 game weeks, Stupinian has the high ceiling, arguably, of any defender in the game. Despite only being 5 million, he is a very template pick, same as Luke Shaw and Trent Alexander-Arnold. Nathan Ake is the only one who's got less than 10% ownership in this starting 11 for the defenders. Arsenal beat the MLS All-Stars 5-0, and Martin Odegaard produced one of the biggest and best moments of the game with a fantastic assist to set up Martinelli, and he's just got that quality. He's arguably Arsenal's best player alongside Bukayo Saka, and he will be the creative force there for Arsenal. He didn't even reach 10 assists last season, but he got 15 goals, which is a record for the most non-penalty goals scored by a midfielder in Premier League history, equaling Kevin De Bruyne. So Martin Odegaard certainly has an eye for goal, but I think this season the goal output might drop down a little bit, but he'll get more assists. And in terms of bonus points, I'm still expecting him to get more than any other Arsenal player, including Saka, Martinelli, and all the other great options that the Gunners have at their disposal. So I still recommend Martin Odegaard if you want to go a bit different and maybe back against the template pick of Bukayo Saka. But honestly, it's going to be really difficult to pick one, even two of those three midfielders to include in your starting 11. Even Leandro Trossard is playing really well in pre-season. He was arguably the man of the match against the MLS All-Stars. Kai Havertz scored his first goal, a fantastic volley towards the end of the game to wrap it up. So Arsenal have 3, 4, even 5 good midfielder options suddenly. But I think the best three remain Martin Odegaard, Saka, and Martinelli, and I think most people would say Saka's the most nailed. He's on penalties. Just go for him, even if his ownership is really high. And I do understand that. And I think towards the end, as we get to the Game Week 1 deadline, I might go back to Bukayo Saka. But I also like the idea of going for Martin Odegaard, who's got around 20% ownership, and also another low-owned player in Martinelli, coming in at around 14% ownership compared to Saka being owned by over half the game. And as for Martinelli, I think he's got the best goal potential of any Arsenal midfielder. He scored the most alongside Martin Odegaard for the Gunners last season, and I'm expecting him to be clear this time round, despite Bukayo Saka obviously being on penalties and having a good eye for goal too. But I think Martinelli is the most clinical finisher at the club, and he can also play down the middle, which hasn't happened enough under Arteta, but that's another option in case injuries happen or whatnot. But with Martinelli even playing on the left-hand side, he's not hogging the touchline, he's making those fantastic and direct runs, and he's the one receiving a lot of big chances as well. My main issue with Martinelli is, can he stay fit? And if he can, as he did last season, then he's going to score a lot of FPL points. He scored 202 last season, and I could easily see him surpassing that if he can play at least 35 plus games this season. Then we go to the other midfielders. Bruno Fernandes is as nailed as they come, coming in at 8.5 million. He's on penalties, he's got bonus points potential, and last season he got robbed of many assists. And if Man United signed that striker, and they're currently linked to the Atalanta striker, I think they could solve some issues there. That over-reliance on Marcus Rashford for goals. I think Bruno Fernandes will have his assist output being increased exponentially, maybe to 15 plus. I would not be surprised by that. And if the penalties are there from the get-go from Game Week 1, which I'm expecting, then Bruno Fernandes could easily get 20 plus goal contributions and 200 plus FPL points. I think that's certainly capable. And then we go to the likes of Pascal Gross, a bit of a differential here, coming in at around 5% ownership, just around 4.5, and he's facing Luton Town at home and 2 other good fixtures for the first 3 game weeks. So I am going very heavy on the Brighton assets, as you can see, because Mitoma is also in here. Estupiñán and Mitoma are the template picks. Pascal Gross is the differential, the one that could gain me some points there from the Brighton fixtures to start the season. I'm a bit concerned about Game Weeks 4 and 5 though, and I think that's the main issue about loading up too much on Brighton assets, because by Game Week 4 or 5 you might want to trim down to 1 or 2 Brighton players, and if you don't have the squad depth, then that could certainly be an issue, because Brighton play the likes of Newcastle at home, Man United away, then it's Bournemouth at home and Aston Villa away, followed by Liverpool at home and Man City away, up until Game Week 9, and it's not until Game Week 10 when the fixtures clear up for the Seagulls. I only have 1 forward in my starting 11, yet he's arguably the only striker you'll ever need in FPL. And of course, I'm talking about Erling Haaland, who comes in at 14 million, yet he's still owned by over 85% of all FPL managers. He scored 272 FPL points last season with 36 goals, which smashed the Premier League goal scoring record in a single season, 9 assists, and to make matters even worse, Manchester City have the best fixtures for the opening 8 game weeks of the season, but I would still consider the possibility of going for Harry Kane over Erling Haaland, because only 9 points separate them in the end, and Harry Kane is as consistent as they come. He also scored the most bonus points of any player, so it's definitely worth considering at least going against the template. Unfortunately though, when it goes wrong, you're going to suffer some really big red arrows because of effective ownership and the way FPL is at the moment. But Erling Haaland will be the most popular FPL asset once again. He'll probably break his own record for the highest ownership of any FPL asset, but he is going to be in most of our teams, probably my one in the end as well. But it's nice to think at least that we can go different with the likes of Harry Kane. Compared to the first draft, my bench is considerably weaker this time round. So I've got Areola in there. He is the 4 million goalkeeper who's got the highest chance of starting games. But Fabianski has been pretty solid in pre-season, and West Ham have won all 3 of their games so far. And at the time of this recording, they've just played the likes of Tottenham Hotspur. So this might be a bit out of date, for example, in certain aspects of what I'm saying once this video is released. But in terms of my other players on the bench, Cody Gakpo is there alongside Bayer and Sorare. So there are issues with all of these players on my bench. Cody Gakpo isn't the most nailed on option, but I do like him for game weeks such as game week 2 against Bournemouth at home. Then you're looking at the likes of Bayer. He blanks in game week 2 because of that fixture against Luton Town being postponed, and Luton Town need to have works on their stadium. And Sorare is a 4.5 million forward, but he's the highest owned of those 4.5 million forwards. So because of that, he is also the most likely, theoretically, to go down in price because more managers will shift him out to better options in the future, especially if they want to maybe restructure their team and invest more money in the forward line. So my bench certainly has issues. You could even point towards my starting 11. The likes of Nathan Ake aren't safe. Flecken isn't guaranteed to start games at the moment because David Raya is still at the club. And you've got Strakosha, who was signed last season by Brentford. So there are certainly some issues in my team. But what I like most is a double Arsenal midfield, especially those lower owned Arsenal assets who are as good as Saka, if not even better potentially. And there won't be many FPL points separating all 3 of them in the end. I've got 2 Manchester City players, which is very good, especially if I hit the nail on the head with Nathan Ake. I've got the best defender in the game in Trent Alexander-Arnold and 2 other solid options in Luke Shaw and Estupinian. I've got a really good differential in Pascal Gross, in my opinion, a very underrated and overlooked asset. Matoma and Bruno Fernandes are also solid options, but I think the triple up in Brighton might be a bit too excessive once we look towards game weeks 4 to 9, and that's where the Brighton assets could cause me some issues. But overall, I'm quite happy with this draft, but there will be changes, I think, by the time we get to the game week 1 deadline. Let's now pop over to a few other sites, including fpl.team and Drafthound. I would highly recommend you check that site out and consider becoming a pro tier member using my link, and I'll be explaining why I've been using these sites to optimize my FPL team. I've been using fpl.team for quite a while now, and I can't stress how important it is to visualize your team in future game weeks because it allows you to plan transfers, chip strategies, and much more because you see it all in front of you. And whilst you can write things down yourself and check what fixtures your players have, I think it's just much better to see it all visualized and right in front of you. You can check your budget as well and start tweaking things and to your liking basically until you find, something you're really comfortable with in the long term. In game week 1, fpl.team predicts me to score 56 points with the assumption that I captain Erling Haaland. My vice captain is currently Martinelli, and it could easily be Odegaard or Bukayo Saka should I bring him in. But I think an Arsenal midfielder is definitely worth considering as a captain over Erling Haaland, but most of us will go for the Norwegian anyway. And as we can see now, if we go to game week 2, things look a bit worse in terms of the fixtures and the predicted points go down to 51, but it's still a pretty decent setup. I think the main issue is from game weeks 4 to 9 because of those Brighton assets I have. I've tripled up on them and that could be a major issue, but once again looks very solid. I've got Flecken, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Nathan Ake, Stupinian, a midfield 5 which I'd pretty much start every single game week, a front 2 of Gakpo and Erling Haaland, and I've got the likes of Luke Shaw on my bench, and Sorare and Bayer are just there to make up the numbers really. But I think this draft compared to my first draft that I made a few weeks ago lacks a bit more squad depth, and you could argue that this squad is worse maybe, and let me know if you think that as well. And there are certainly going to be issues with all of the drafts we make, and even with our final teams, because there's no such thing as a perfect draft. I think one major issue with all of my drafts so far is the fact that in Game Week 2, I'm not that confident in most of the captaincy options, even Erling Haaland, because while I think he will score against Newcastle at home, I don't see him having as high a ceiling as someone like Mohamed Salah facing Bournemouth at home, for example. So that's still something I'm yet to crack, and you could argue that going for Gakpo or Trent Alexander-Arnold as captain is also viable, but that's something that I'll probably consider once we get closer to the Game Week 1 deadline and we've seen more during pre-season. Let's now swap over to Drafthound, and I'm also going to be showing you some of the tools that they have in order to optimize your FPL team, and I have to say it's also made a massive difference since I started using it this summer. There are several tools which haven't been released yet, and they should come into play later this month, such as the player comparison and predicted lineups, but the player rankings and fixture analysis are already live here, and you've also got the iOS app, you've got the Android app, as well as the website, of course. And as a Pro Team member, you have access to all of these tools. You can even have the assistant manager optimize things. So for example, if I decide to remove Nathan Ake, I've got a few issues about him. I click this little one tool here, and here we go with the auto pick, and it puts Gabriel, who I had in my first draft, and I also think he's a very solid option. So I do like the algorithm, and I think the auto pick tool is actually quite handy compared to the FPL website, for example. But as you can see here, I've got several of the highest scoring players according to the expected points over the next 3 game weeks. So I've got Erling Haaland, Martin Odegaard, Trent Alexander-Arnold, and Bruno Fernandes. But of course, I don't have the likes of Bukayo Saka, Salah, Harry Kane, and even the likes of Jack Grealish. And I have to say, I don't agree with that Jack Grealish pick, but pretty much every single other player in the top 10, with maybe the exception as well of Luis Diaz, I think is pretty much spot on. I think Bruno Fernandes, Trent, Rashford, Odegaard, Kane, Saka, Salah, Erling Haaland all justify their inclusion in such a high part of this list, and I think that's completely understandable. And according to my predicted points, it's now actually 59.9 if I put Gabriel, but with Nathan Ake, I think it was a little bit lower. 58.7, and I can see why. Gabriel is going to be more of a solid option long term than Nathan Ake. He's going to be more nailed on, better goal threat too, more bonus points. So I think that Gabriel over Ake pick could be a very smart suggestion by Drafthound. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. What would you change with my current draft, and do you think this is better or worse than the other drafts I've shown already on this channel, including the preliminary draft before any prices were revealed, and also the first draft which I made a few weeks ago. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Let's try to get this video to over 300 likes. Let's keep on pushing towards 19,000 subscribers and beyond. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description below for the Patreon, channel memberships, Discord server, and the FPL League. And I'd highly encourage you to become a Pro Team member with Drafthound using my link as well. You won't regret it, I do promise you that. Make sure to watch all the other videos that I've released during pre-season, and keep an eye out for future content as well, including the deadline stream, and I'll see you very soon.